The Grand Chess Tour has now rolled into Paris and they've just finished the third day. So the Rapids are now over, and once again Wesley So is leading the tournament, but it's quite close. So he has 12 points, 2 points for a win, and just behind him Sergei Karyakin and Hikaru Nakamura, both real specialists in blitz. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next 2 days. But the game I want to show you from this rapid section of the tournament is Viswanathan Anand, the world rapid champion, against Hikaru Nakamura. This was an absolutely superb fight. Quite a long game, but each phase absolutely fascinating. A really well contested game. Anand with white opens with e4. Nakamura plays the modern, so that shows he's up for a fight. Anand repeats the variation that Vachier Legrave played against Nakamura in Leuven a few days ago. Here Vachier Legrave played rook d1, but they're going to reach a very similar position in that game. Anand played c3 instead, but it doesn't make much odds. Anand grabs the bishops and e5. So that means that there's a lot of pressure here, and potentially soon pressure on the e-file as well. Therefore Anand closes the position, and that fixed pawn structure of course is, well, it's basically a King's Indian pawn structure, and the themes are very similar, except that black does not have this light squared bishop, which is usually a very key attacking piece for when black wants to get this initiative rolling on the king's side. So that's one big difference. I mean, this is actually a really important moment in the game where black has to decide which strategy to employ. So for example, you could career on in typical King's Indian fashion and try to force through these moves with knight f6 and g5 h5 and then g4, of course very dangerous. But without that light squared bishop, it's not so easy to break through. Very double-edged. You could also exchange on e4. That's somehow not as dangerous for white. And I think with good control over e4, it's pleasant for white to play. Then again, black is able to put the knight on d4, supported by bishop and pawn. So it's not so bad. And there's another way. Nakamura plays c6, so he's keeping his options open. To be honest, I'm not that keen on this move c6. I feel it does a lot of the hard work for white already, because you want to open up the queen side to get counterplay, and usually in the King's Indian it's that d6 pawn that is the big weakness. That's where white tries to land. So yeah, I'm actually not too keen on Hikaru's plan. King h8 I do like, and in fact he could have done this maneuver that he goes for now with knight g8 without playing c6. Typical King's Indian idea. You want to exchange off the bad bishop for this rather good piece on e3, and therefore weaken the dark squares in white's position. So this is very logical, but you see what I mean. This could have been done with the pawns here, and I think yeah, white's queenside play wouldn't be as quick. Anand uses this time that black is consuming with these maneuvers to really get going on the c file. So a6 was necessary to prevent knight b5, but rook c2, excellent move, because after this, exchanges and queen d2, getting time by attacking the knight. That's closed, and now rook c1. So very efficient development from Anand. He's been able to double on the c file, and of course would like to enter with rook c7. And kingside play is well, not very well developed from black's viewpoint. certainly g5, g4 isn't happening anytime soon. f3 you've got to watch out for. Now the knight has moved back, so there's no longer a pin, so Anand played f3. Knight d1, this is a great move. First point is that opens the c file for the rook, so we'd like to land in here. Nakamura wants to block things out with a5. That prevents b4, so he's looking to play the knight into c5. Knight f2, the knight redeploys. We'll see in a moment how clever this maneuver is actually. And knight c5. So Nakamura trying to block out the rooks. Anand could sack the exchange here. Well, he does so in the game, and it's kind of similar. We'll see in a second. Bishop b5 is, of course, a very good move. And if Nakamura were to bolster this knight with b6, preventing this exchange sack, then actually white can play relatively slowly with b3, rook c3 to protect that pawn, and then a3 and b4. Just drive the knight away and force the c-file open. And the counterplay on the king side, it just isn't happening. White is beautifully placed there, very, very solid, so the king is safe. So Nakamura played queen b6, attacking the bishop. And now Anand sacrificed the exchange. This is very strong. And a4 supporting the bishop. It's a really nice positional sacrifice. With the pawn gone from d6, then you can see the e5 pawn is weak. This is the problem for black. And that bishop is so beautifully placed. Controlling e8, so a rook can't get there. Also controlling d7, so the knight can't protect the pawn. So, given a couple of moves, knight d3, queen c3, that pawn is going to fall very, very easily. Then white would have two beautiful connected past pawns in the middle of the board. Looks overwhelming. So at this point, Nakamura really has to fight back. He needs to shake things up, and he did that by giving this pawn back straight away with c4. Good move, at least a good practical move in rapid play. So just for a moment, there's a pin here. But also he wants to open up a file so that he can possibly exchange rooks. Rooks need open files, it's as simple as that. And it's worth giving a pawn to do that. Anand could have played rook takes pawn. And here played a very subtle move, rook c3. This I like a lot, so that if black does trade, then the queen takes its place on c3, attacking e5, and black has the same problems as before, and soon, after a king f1, knight d3 comes as well. That wouldn't be bad, but instead he played queen c3. I think he's trying to keep things absolutely under control. Now the queen is threatening the pawn on e5, so therefore queen d6. So queen takes c4. So this is Anand's idea. In playing this maneuver, he's looking to control the c-file. Now, if Nakamura just sits there, he'll be lost very quickly. So knight d3 will come to attack here. Anand could look to play perhaps queen c5 or queen c7, exchange the queens, and then e5 is just going to drop. It's tremendous, tremendous for white. So Nakamura again has to try and change the nature of the position. So that's why he played rook c8. And of course Anand has anticipated this. He played queen takes rook. So again, we've got another change in the position. Anand has now, well, it was an exchange sacrifice, and now it's a queen sacrifice. Kind of. He's got rook, bishop, and pawn for the queen, so it's a rough material balance, but very, very tricky position when you're fighting against the queen. Queens need targets. They need things to attack, and the problem for the black queen here is that actually everything is protected in white's position. Everything important is protected. So it should actually be favourable for white, this position, because this pawn is still vulnerable, and if we can drive away the queen, then that pawn could be, well, decisive actually. One slight problem, and this is highlighted by Nakamura's next move, knight h5. The king is just a little bit vulnerable. If it stays on the king side, it could be vulnerable to some kind of attack with queen and knight. So this is where Anand plays, I think, a great maneuver. He wants to bring his king over to this side of the board, where it'll be away from the knight and much safer, much better protected against the queen. So he plays king f1. Queen b6, be careful, the queen's going to come in. So knight c5, just blocking out the queen. All these pieces protect each other. It's beautiful. I mean, the rook is unprotected, but actually it's impossible to attack the rook. So what does Nakamura do next? Well, he brings his king out. So he's still fighting hard. Here he plays knight g3. Now that's waste time actually. It's the kind of move you make in rapid play, bang. But actually it would have been much better just to bring the king into the game as quickly as possible to attack this pawn. And well, all we can say is that gives some counterplay. But knight g3, and that allows Anand to continue this really beautiful and very effective king march. And this king wanders up as well. So g2 is under fire, but Anand has it under control. Knight d3, attacking the e5 pawn. So that if king takes g2, then knight e5 looks really powerful. If we just switch back with the knight, and then we can start pushing these pawns. Because the king is so secure, it's actually very difficult for black to find counterplay against that, even though the king has come forward and can take some pawns, but probably just too slow. That's why after this move, knight d3, Nakamura played queen d4, protecting the e-pawn and still guarding against the advance of white's d-pawn. But that gives Anand time to cut back with the rook to protect against g2. So now we've got the position again has kind of stabilized after that little moment of insecurity. What does Nakamura do now? Brought the knight back into play. Looks logical. Now knight c5. So what's Anand going to do? Well, maybe he just wants to play the knight back to b3, attacking the queen, and then play the rook to d2, and then he could start advancing that pawn again. So Nakamura has to react quickly again. He's really on the edge here actually. Queen d1, attacking the rook, so that stops that plan. But king b3 keeps things protected. g5, still looking for counterplay. Knight d3, so he's Anand trying to shut out the queen here and looking to advance. And also looking at the pawn on e5. In fact, Nakamura should have just played h5. This would be the best move. And then, well, there's a funny variation. You're never going to spot this in time pressure. Knight takes e5. Knight takes d5. Takes, check. Hitting the knight drops, check, and this should be a draw. Of course the king can't move away because the rook is on prise, and after rook c3, queen d1 check. If the king drops back, we take here, and that's serious counterplay. Once this goes, then these roll. So in fact, after queen d1, this should end in a draw by perpetual check, like this. Okay, this is fantasy. In the game, Nakamura played knight d7. Mistake. King stepped out of the way, so now the rook is out of the pin. And here Anand took on e5, which certainly looks like a really strong move. In fact, he should have just pushed the d-pawn. And after queen g1, looking to cut back with the queen, rook f2 is a really beautiful move. Just shutting out black's queen, and that knight controls all these key squares, preventing a check from the queen, and on the next turn d7 and d8. Should be winning for white. But Anand played knight e5. And now Nakamura gets tricky with the queen. Queen e1 check. The king's in a bit of a dilemma. King d3 runs into queen e3, checkmate. Rook d2 runs into knight takes, queen takes. Now the queen blockades, and well, I imagine that should be a draw. I don't see either side making progress in that position at all. But Anand, after this check, played king b3. I think he's still looking to play for a win, but after this, it's not so good. Queen and knight are notoriously tricky, notoriously dangerous combination of pieces because they complement each other so well. This knight wants to jump back to c5 and threaten a check. So Anand, pragmatic as ever, gets rid of that knight, but incredibly that queen can just create trouble. Attacking the knight, and in combination with these pawns, in fact, black launches a really dangerous attack, and suddenly the position has turned against white. This looks horrible. Reminds me of some Sicilian positions where the A and B pawns advance down the board to cramp the king, and this is what happens here. And in this position, Anand resigned. Well, in fact, it's a hopeless position. The knight and the rook need to keep guarding the king, but in the meantime, this is en prise, and these pawns just drop. It's actually a dreadful position. I thought it was a fascinating game, and I think Hikaru Nakamura was really on the edge there, but he just found enough in the position to keep it complicated, and when Anand made an inaccuracy, Nakamura pounced. Great stuff. So just to recap, Wesley So has 12 points, Nakamura and Karyakin have 11, Anand has 9. He's on 50%, so he's still in with a shot depending on what happens in the blitz over the next 2 days. Do check out Hikaru Nakamura's playlist. There are some other great games in there for you to look at. I'll be reporting back in a couple of days.